Welcome back to the I Am Passionate podcast. It's your host, Jaron Smith, and I hope you all are having a good start to your December so far. And we've got Thursday Night Football. And it's also just crazy to think that we are in week 14 of the NFL season. It doesn't even feel like it's week 14. And it's just insane. It definitely feels the Christmassy kind of season, where I'm from, simply just because it's been cold. There's a lot of snow on the ground, but that's beside the point. But also kind of speaking a little about Christmas. Let me know down in the comments, what say maybe your favorite Christmas movie or Christmas song. If I had to give my answer on that, the Christmas song, I can't really think of ones I guess I would just say Jingle Bells, which I know that's kind of a basic answer. And if I had to say Christmas movie, and this is entirely because of my brother, but the Drake and Josh Christmas movie. Love that movie. Great movie. And I would say some of the songs in that movie that I think those were, pretty good songs. But if I had to say something different from that movie, I recently watched Die Hard with my girlfriend for the first time. That was a good movie, and that's a Christmas movie. I'd also say Home Alone, but I feel like, yes, there are other answers that I could have given, but I'm going to say those two. Is it because those are the easy answers for me? Probably, but that is okay. But let me know down below what's your favorite Christmas song, Christmas movie, anything Christmas related. Let me know your favorite part about it. And so, to talk about my top 5 games from last week, Bears versus Eagles is number 1. Simply just because I did not think the Bears were going to play as well. Like, don't get me wrong, the Eagles this year, they have not looked good, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. But I did think that the Bears' offensive line was not going to hold up in pass protection against the Eagles for a whole game. But number 1, they did. Number 2, they ran all over the Eagles. DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai both had amazing games. I did not expect them to, to do that against this Eagles. I expected maybe one of them to get 100, but not both of them. Second, I'm going to say the Cowboys versus the Chiefs. I think as a whole, that was just a very good football game, and I feel like the Cowboys, they're kind of turning up at the right time. Number 3, I'm going to say the Panthers versus the Rams. 2 reasons why. Number 1, for the Panthers, kind of a short week because they played Monday Night Football, and then, they were able to come in. I think they were on the road against the Rams, correct me if I'm wrong, and, they just they didn't dominate the game because the Rams still had a chance to win, but they played good enough football, all across the board. Bryce Young, one of his best games. I know kind of when we see Bryce Young play well, it's like it's easy to throw out one of his best games, but against a team as good as the Rams are and how good Bryce Young did look in that game, I'm going to give him some credit and say that definitely should be, one of his best football games with all things considered. Number 4, I'm going to say the Broncos versus the Commanders. The Broncos, they're weird. They're weird. They're weird like in the opposite way that I thought was calling the Falcons weird at the beginning of the year. Because I feel like, yes, the Broncos are 10-2. I think they're 10-2 or 9-3. They're one or the other. But I feel like the Broncos should be better than what they are, and I did not expect them to be in such a close game against the Commanders. And number 5, the Texans versus the Colts. Yes, Daniel Jones is basically playing with a fractured fibula. He did not play as bad as I was expecting him to play in that game. He did not. And the Colts had some chances to win that game. Missing that extra point was huge, simply just because, they would have been playing to, attempt to tie the game. They would have had more time instead of, basically, we got to go win the football game right now. But that Texans defense, man, that Texans defense is just insane. I think that Texans defense, I think that if they sneak into the playoffs, I think they could be a dark horse. And now moving on to my prediction record, this is probably my best week predicting games all season. And I'd argue that this will be the closest, again, I've said this once before, that I will have been to being, basically undefeated. It's just easier to say my losses rather than my wins. But the Rams lost to the Panthers, the Falcons lost to the Jets, and the Ravens lost to the Bengals. And I believe the other time where I was really close to being undefeated, prediction record-wise, the Ravens were also a part of that. But we're going to move on to talking about the Week 14 schedule starting tonight with the Cowboys versus the Lions. This is a huge game. Huge. because whoever ends up losing this game, their season might be over. Now, some of you are going to be like, hold up, wait a minute. Like you're going to mention the Lions, which I understand that, but the Packers and the Bears basically would be 2 games ahead of the Lions if they lose tonight. And, the Lions losing their offensive coordinators, it's been hitting them a lot lately. Like, I knew it would hurt them. It was a matter of when and not if. There was a little bit where they were making it seem like, we don't need, Ben Johnson. We don't need Aaron Glenn. But when you get into December, you're playing, arguably some of the most meaningful football that's obviously outside of, January and then obviously the Super Bowl. Because this is the time where, teams who are, so close to, being able to make a playoff push, this is the time that they make it. And then, they kind of ride that momentum into the playoffs. And the Lions, they don't have that momentum right now. But the Cowboys kind of do. They beat, the Super Bowl champions last year, the Eagles, and they were down 21-0. They beat the Chiefs on a shortened week, a.k.a. on Thanksgiving, and looked good doing it. So I'm going to give them some credit. And, the Cowboys, they have a chance to catch the Eagles. They need to have a couple things, kind of go their way, kind of hope that a couple teams are able to beat the Eagles while they, keep stacking up these wins. But I will admit that I kind of think that the tie the Cowboys had against the Packers earlier this year is going to come back to bite them in the butt. I really think it is. And for the Lions, I'm scared for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, the Lions defense plays a lot of man coverage. And when you look at the stats for receivers, as in who has the most yardage against man coverage, I'll give you a second to guess who it is. Yes, I just went quiet for a second. It's George Pickens. George Pickens has had an amazing season. Of course, people are going to say Puka Nacua is the best wide receiver or in football this year, or, JSN, which both are valid answers. But George Pickens, he's easily in that conversation. And the other person in that conversation is Davante Adams because, he's leading the NFL in touchdowns. But the other thing that concerns me about the Lions is Amon-Ra. At the time of me recording this, it's possible he's a game time decision. It's also like, he's basically being listed as questionable. Probably, typically an hour before kickoff. It's probably around. I'm, in the Central Time Zone, so the game starts for me a little after 7. So probably at about 6 o'clock ish. Central Time that going to know if he's going to play or not. And yes, the Cowboys are known to have a bad defense, but since the trade deadline, their defense has been playing pretty well. But for this game, I'm going to take the Cowboys to get the win, 34-30, and apply even more pressure on the Eagles. Next game, the Titans versus the Browns. Well, first thing I want to mention is not even have anything to do with what you were expecting. Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson, he's basically, the Browns have activated his window, so he's got 21 days to prove that, he's, let's just say contact game ready before basically the Browns are forced to put him on the IR for the rest of the season. Now, I've got a few things with Deshaun Watson because, of course, when he was in Houston his last few seasons, he was playing at a very, very high level. And at the Browns, he has not been the same quarterback. He's had flashes, don't get me wrong. But I do not think it's really worth it to play Deshaun Watson this season unless you're able, because I'm pretty sure the Browns in the playoff picture, which I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, but when they are officially eliminated, they just need 1 loss and then they are officially eliminated. Now, if you're officially eliminated and you want to play Deshaun Watson, okay, fine, but you're still paying him all that money. So, in all honesty, I would just let Shedeur Sanders, ride the season out, or even Dillon Gabriel if it comes to that. And of course, if you have to have Deshaun Watson as the backup quarterback, then fine, have him as the backup quarterback. But I think you should let the rookies, kind of just have the rest of the season, especially if, the Browns lose and officially get eliminated, because you have I think his original contract was $230 million. I get you don't want to bench a $230 million quarterback, but what's the point of, he basically had a season-ending injury last year. What's the point of putting him out there to, basically have him get hurt? When in reality, he could have, a whole offseason to get ready. The Browns, they had made some draft day moves. So, they're going to have, I think they have the Jaguars' first-round pick for this upcoming season, which I understand that might be kind of middle of the pack. But still, you're going to have, some draft picks. You can help make the Cleveland offense better. That defense is fine. but the offense is the concern. The offense and potentially the head coach, because Kevin Stefanski, he is on the hot seat. He is. So I think you have the picks to be able to make Cleveland, an attractive, situation. If you want to trade him and get, kind of get a star in one of the places that they need on offense, you could. Quinshon Judkins, good running back. You don't need a running back. I think retooling the offensive line would help, but I think the Browns need some wide receivers. I think that's where they need to go. But I don't think for the quarterback who will be playing this game, Shedeur Sanders, I think he should treat this as just a normal game. Simply because I understand that, he had his huge fall, last week. And I get the feeling that based on the outcome of this game, the media is going to say something like, oh, Shedeur Sanders is not a first round talent. Look at how much better Cam Ward is than him. Blah, 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 blah. No, I think he just needs to, keep kind of doing what he's doing. I do think he needs to get rid of the ball a little faster. Sometimes I think he holds on to it. But what rookie quarterback, I think a lot of rookie quarterbacks have the problem of, holding on to the football. And even into next year, I am, by my definition of a rookie quarterback, once you've played more than your first season, so essentially once you've played 16, 17 games, you're not a rookie to me. So I think, the Browns defense is going to handle everything. I think Shedeur Sanders, he'll just need to play like he had been, the previous two games. You can't go out there and throw up a stink bomb and throw multiple interceptions and have to have your defense bail you out, because one too many times, if the defense has to bail you out, you might lose this game. But I think the Browns are going to win this game 20-7. I think the Titans are not going to be able to do anything against this Browns defense. Moving on to Seattle versus the Falcons. First thing I got to say about Seattle is their defense put the Vikings in the blender last week. The blender. And the other thing to talk about is Sam Darnold has not been playing as well. And, earlier in the season, teams were not really blitzing Seattle as much, also because their offensive line had been playing, a lot better. And their offensive line is still relatively healthy. But in the recent games, the Seattle's been getting blitzed a little bit more, and Sam Darnold has not really been playing, all that great. And I saw a comment, on a comment section about, the Seattle Vikings game last week, because the Vikings quarterback, he did not play well. And somebody was saying that Sam Darnold did not play that much better, and I could not disagree. I disagreed with that comment so much, because the person initially was saying Sam Darnold did not play much better than the Vikings quarterback did last week. And I do think that I understand also that the Vikings, with their quarterback situation, Wentz is out for the year. JJ McCarthy, basically was not active for this game. So you kind of have to play. So in a way, yes, you kind of were thrown to the wolves, but the Vikings, they didn't really have much of other choice besides for, going back to pay Sam Darnold, but they don't got a time machine. But I think that, Sam Darnold, he didn't finish that game with any turnovers. Yes, he didn't look amazing. He didn't throw for 300 yards. So I think that he did what he needed to do, and that's what matters. Like, yeah, I mean, of course, you want to see your quarterbacks, have a good game, but he didn't lose you the game. Now, would I argue that the Vikings quarterback lost them the game? The only bad play that I saw that quarterback make was that pick six early in the game, where it was third down, the Vikings were driving, and he was trying to extend the play. DeMarcus Lawrence, I believe, was unblocked, and he threw a pick six to Ernest Jones. That was his only, really bad play. And some of his other interceptions, I'm aware that, it was, overthrown. But, when it comes to a rookie quarterback making your first start in arguably the toughest place to play, the overthrows is something that I can look past. What I can't look past is that first interception. I can't look past that. If it was Lamar Jackson, I would have said the same thing. Like, when the Ravens played the Bengals last week and he had that fumble. I'm sorry about that. When he fumbled, which I almost thought was an interception. The first fumble, which the Bengals didn't end up doing anything with it. But I'm like, Lamar, what the heck, man? Like, that was bad play. But I give the Bengals credit for what they were able to do last week against Baltimore. I'm going to give them credit because I think their defense was playing well. But at the same time, I did think the Ravens shot themselves in the foot. But I'm getting off track. I'm rambling when I'm not intending to ramble. The Falcons, they ended up losing to the Jets last week. And I'm just more curious about what they're going to do in the offseason. They would need a miracle at this point to make the playoffs, and unfortunately, I don't think they're going to get their miracle. I think Seattle's going to get this win 28-17. Moving on to the Colts versus the Jaguars. The AFC South is in a very close race. The Texans are basically one game back from both of these teams, and I did not expect this a month ago when the Colts were 7-1. Yes, they've been 1-3 in their last 4 games. And Daniel Jones, he didn't play as bad last week as I thought he was going to. He's playing through a fractured fibula. And whoever ends up losing this game, I think they're going to have to play perfect down the stretch, simply because, and like also the Colts, they've got a tougher schedule than, the Jaguars do down the stretch. Like the Colts have to go, I think, on the road. Actually, no, they have to play against the Texans in week 18. That's going to be a game that means something. That's a tough game. Well, the Jaguars have to play the Titans to close the season. But I think the Colts are going to get this game 24-20. I think Jonathan Taylor is going to have a great game. Moving on to the Commanders versus the Vikings. I don't really have much to say about this game because both these teams are pretty much, they're focused on next season. The Commanders season was affected by injuries all around. And, I kind of knew during the offseason that since it took so long to get Terry McLaurin that deal done, I knew the start of their season wasn't going to be all that great. I just had that feeling. Now that I think that their season was going to go this bad, no. I kind of thought they were going to be where the Ravens were, where it's like 6-6 years. You still got a chance, but, you're not looking as good as you did the previous season. And the Vikings, this season, they've just had bad quarterback play. They really have. Their defense, like, yeah, they're not forcing the takeaways like they did last season, but overall, I think their defense has still been playing pretty well. And the thing is, I would not be surprised if their defensive coordinator gets a head coaching job. And so I'd be surprised if their defense does not take a step back next season. I'm going to take the Commanders to win this one, 17-13. I think, last week the Commanders, I do think they looked good against the Broncos. And, I think that, I think they're going to get a win. I think they're going to get a win. An important game next, we've got the Bengals versus the Bills. Like I was mentioning before when I was rambling a little bit, the Bengals defense, they played amazing against the Ravens last week. I think they're going to need to have to do it again, though, through Josh Allen. Simply just because both Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson can, mess up a game in similar ways, but at the same time, very different ways. And so, yes, the Bills had a slow start against the Steelers, but they picked it up when it mattered most. And I think whoever wins this game is going to be determined by whoever runs the ball better. Because if I'm the Bengals, I'm relying on, Chase Brown and Samaje Perine. Because I want to keep Josh Allen on the sideline as long as possible. And on the other side, if I'm the Bills, James Cook, I can't remember all their other running backs' names off the top of my head at the moment. I'm sorry about that. But I think the Bills need to control the clock just the same way as the Bengals do. Because I think whoever has this ball last, I think either team is capable of winning this game. I trust Joe Burrow in a 2-minute drill situation. I trust Josh Allen in a 2-minute drill situation. I think the Bengals have the team offensively a little bit better to handle having to go, let's just say, 85 yards, maybe one timeout against the Buffalo's defense, even though Buffalo has a very good pass defense. But in the same vein, I do trust the Bills to have to do it because the Bengals defense, they aren't good. Like, yes, they're improving, but they're not good yet. They're improving when it matters most because they're trying to make a late season playoff push. But I'm going to take the Bills doing 27-21. I believe Josh Allen's legs are going to be the factor in this game. He's going to extend a couple of plays. I think the Bengals are going to have a chance late if they get a stop, but I think Josh Allen is going to pick up a huge first down on the ground. 27-21. An NFC South matchup between the Saints and the Bucks. This is going to be interesting because the Bucks, they need to keep winning because the Panthers are basically right there. It's neck and neck. A lot of divisions this year are truly neck and neck. I would say the only division where you pretty much, I think they'll probably be the first team to officially win their division. It'd probably be the Patriots. The Chargers, they still have a chance to, take that division. The AFC North, aka the Ravens division, I think that's going to go down to, week 17, week 18. The Bears, if they keep winning, I think they can be one of the teams who first get it. But since they still have to play the Packers twice, I think that's going to be late. I would bet that the Patriots are probably going to be the first team to win their division because they've got, I think, the biggest lead in their division. Otherwise, Every division is pretty much close. And so something I want to talk about, I saw on social media, essentially it was Baker Mayfield being, like he was at the media, taking questions, and a reporter had asked, his thoughts on the Panthers head coach Dave Canales. For those of you who do not know, Dave Canales used to be the Bucks offensive coordinator. And I find it funny, why would you ask that kind of question? Because it's meant to just get a rise. You're meant to trying to get clicks, click views. And Baker Mayfield's response was that, like, Dave can do what he wants. We're focused on the Saints. Great response. Um, which Baker Mayfield, he's that type of guy that, have a response like that. Or he's gonna, kind of talk, like joking, because like a couple weeks when the Bucks played the Bills, Baker Mayfield and Josh Allen, I don't know how close the relationship is, but they have enough of a relationship to, kind of talk a little friendly trash talk. Which that's kind of exactly what both sides did. Another situation with Baker Mayfield having that sort of be able to talk a little bit more freely while still being himself and respectful. There was a story a few years ago. I think Baker was still in on Cleveland talking about his relationship with Lamar Jackson, and Baker Mayfield was talking about how Lamar Jackson's mom was very intimidating, which I thought was a really funny story. But back to this game. For the Saints, I think something that they need to do this offseason is, I think, adding a veteran quarterback, I think, is going to help them a lot. And I think maybe getting some wide receivers. I think that'll help them out a lot. So I think the Bucks are going to win this game 30-14. And let's move on to a team I've talked about a lot. The Steelers versus the Ravens. I think no matter who wins this game, their next matchup is going to be flexed into maybe like a Sunday, like a primetime game, like Sunday Night Football, or like a 3 p.m. game on a Sunday. Just because, the AFC North, this division is still close, and with Joe Burrow coming back, it just applies more pressure on, I'm going to say specifically the Ravens, just because, the Ravens and Bengals still have to play one more time. The Steelers and Bengals have already had their tiebreaker. Both of these teams did not look good last week, but I would say the Ravens looked worse, simply just because the Steelers are playing the Bills. They've kind of been looking on the weaker side the last couple of weeks. But the Ravens, they had been in an upward climb. They had been playing really, really well. And then I just feel like they just were shooting themselves in the foot last week. And the Bengals, I believe, they had 5 turnovers, in which they had 10 in the whole season, I believe, like before that game. And so I think the Steelers, I think they're going to try to run the football. I think they don't want Derrick Henry to wreck the game. And for the Ravens, from the time I'm saying this now to the end of the season, they need to run the football. Every Ravens fan is going to tell you that the Ravens need to run the football. The Ravens are not a pass blocking offensive line. They are not. They're very good run blockers. They can pass block, but they are exponentially better, in my opinion, at blocking for the run. I think the Ravens need to give the ball to Derrick Henry 20 to 25 times. Easy. Give the ball to Keaton Mitchell at least 10 times. Easy. I think, Derrick Henry is going to be the key for the Ravens to make the playoffs, because come January, if the Ravens are in the conversation, there's not a lot of people who are going to want to tackle, Derrick Henry, who's 6'3", 250 pounds, running like a freight train down the football field. Not a lot of people are going to want to tackle him. But yes, there are some teams who are still in the playoff picture in the AFC side of things who do have a really good defense. And I think if the Ravens and Texans met up in the playoffs, I think the Texans defense could, make things tough. But again, that's beside the point. I think the Ravens, if they lose this game, it's going to come down to coaching. I think it is. I think, whether it be a questionable play call or, maybe John Harbaugh does something. I don't know. My gut's telling me coaching. But I will take the Ravens to win this game 27-17. I think the offensive play, I think they're going to start out running the football early. And I think that's going to help them, and I think the Steelers are going to be forced to pass, which is going to give the Ravens an to give the Ravens an opportunity to, get some takeaways. So moving on to the Dolphins versus the Jets, I saw a post on Instagram, I'm referring to, my social media activity. Essentially, the Miami's head coach, he's never had a career record below 500. He's been at 500 directly, but he's never been below 500. I'm not surprised, because I think it was 2 years ago when they were like 13-3 or something like that, or something along those lines. I don't remember what the year was, but I know they had a really good season a couple years ago. Then after that, they kind of just been 9-8, 8-9, so on. They're 5-7 right now. The Jets, they got a good win last week against the Falcons, and they did enough in the second half to get that win. And Miami last week, they kind of almost blew a lead. That 2-point conversion, like the interception that Minkah Fitzpatrick got to, make it the score 21-17. That was huge. That was huge. But for the score prediction, I'm going to take Miami to get this one 24-17. Moving on to the Broncos versus the Raiders. I already talked about, how I thought the Broncos are a weird football team, specifically offensively. Defense, they're going to be fine. They're going to be fine defensively. And I did not expect them to be in a close game against the Commanders. I did not. And the thing that they were really close to losing that football game, because when I saw, the player that Marcus Mariota, which there is a whole thing about, it's not Mariota, it's Mariota, I think. I have to listen to the video again to make sure I get the pronunciation right. But, the Commanders, quarterback, the play was a great play call. Just not, they needed a lob pass on that throw, which I get the fear in that situation. If you get too much air underneath it, it's going to give the defense time to come and, lay a hit on the receiver. And I understand that's why, the pass wasn't really, it was more of like a quicker kind of pass, not like a straight bullet, but, it was meant to kind of get the ball out quick, which I get it. And the Raiders, I ain't got much for them to say. I ain't really got much to say. I think the two things that they need to do, number one, is they need to improve their secondary, and number two, they need to improve their offensive line. Give me Denver to win this one 30-7. This is an important matchup for the NFC West, the Rams versus the Cardinals, because first place is on the line. By that I mean, if the Rams lose this game, but Seattle wins, Seattle will be in first place. But on the same vein, if the Rams win this game and Seattle loses their game, the Rams will stay in first place. So Arizona could play spoiler. They really could, and make things more difficult for the Rams, which that would be interesting. And I do think the Rams are clearly the better team, and I am surprised that they lost last week. I'm more surprised that, the Panthers were able to make this Stafford's worst outing of the season, which I'm sure that probably places Drake May, the Patriots quarterback, as the MVP favorite right now. And because there also was the stat where it's been well over a month since Matt Stafford had last thrown his interception. I believe he threw 3 against the Patriots. Against the Panthers. And I think a good way for the Rams to bounce back would just be to, get the run game going. Don't make Matthew Stafford have to drop back and pass a whole bunch of times, because I believe the teams who can run the ball well this time of year, they're poised to make, a good run in January and, be in the Super Bowl. Give me the Rams to win this one 35-21. My next game, NFC North Showdown, the game I'm most looking forward to this week, the Bears versus the Packers. Early in the season, what I kind of viewed the Bears' narrative was that they weren't as good as their record dictated simply just because they're beating up on the bad teams. Well, first, I'd have to say that you have to play, who's on your schedule. I always kind of have that belief. But they've been playing some good teams lately and, getting wins, or at least the teams that would give the Bears respect. By that, I mean, they beat the Steelers, who are above 500. They just put the brakes, they put BTA on the Eagles. I know the Vikings at the time did not have a good record against the Bears, but they are still a divisional rival opponent, which those games are always close. And I get it. That game went down to a last-second field goal. Good game all around. They've been playing some good teams. And so I think the Bears, I think they're very, very close to making the playoffs. Very, very close. I think they need to get at least 2 to 3 wins to be able to make the playoffs. I say 2 to 3. Clinching the division might take 3 to 4 wins, but I think clinching a playoff spot will take 2 to 3. That's my guess. I'd have to look at it. I don't think the Bears are a team that many teams are going to want to play, simply just because they can run the football. Their defense is playing well. And, I feel like I think the only flaw I can put on the Bears team is I would just like to see Caleb Williams complete more passes. I think Caleb Williams is going to be a great quarterback. And the only thing that I can just knock him on, which some of the times I will admit that receivers drop the passes. Like there was a pass in the Eagles game where I think it would have Caleb Williams would have had a big play to DJ Moore, but DJ Moore ended up slipping. So I feel like this season there's been a lot of situations like that, and so it's not all on Caleb Williams, but because I believe his completion percentage is close to 60, is a little below. It's 58. I know it's unrealistic to say he needs to get up to 70, but I think having him, if he can get to the low 60s, to 63%, that'll also be a huge confidence builder. But you could also argue against me and saying, Jaron, why does this completion percentage matter when they're winning games? And that's a very valid take. I think raising his completion percentage would be a good thing because come January, teams are going to, try to make Caleb Williams beat them if the Bears are lucky enough to make it to January, which I do think they will be. For the Packers, I think the Packers have been kind of up and down this year a little bit more than they have been in years past. Yes, they got a great win against the Lions on Thanksgiving. That defensive line on the Packers, I think they wrecked the game. They played really well. And yes, the Lions still had some chances to get the win. But I think for this game between the Bears and the Packers, what's going to be decided who wins. I think if the Bears offensive line does their job, I think the Bears will get the win. But I think if the Bears offensive line is slacking and, allows Rashawn Gary, Micah Parsons, and company to, wreck the game, it could be a long day for Chicago. So, but I'm going to take the Bears to get this win 28-24. I think they'll win, a close game. And I think this is kind of the year where people will start to say that, the Bears are not, an easy win again. Like the Packers aren't an easy win for the Bears. Like I'm saying that wrong. I think people will start to say like the Bears are going to be competitive. They're not going to hand out any easy wins. That's what I'm trying to say. So moving on to Sunday Night Football between the Texans versus the Chiefs. This is a huge game. I would say it's a little bit of a bigger game for the Chiefs than it is the Texans. For the Chiefs, the two teams above them, they are essentially 10-win teams right now. And I believe that their season would be over with a single loss because if they lose to the Texans, they won't have that tiebreaker. And, they kind of need the tiebreakers, all the ones that they can get right now. And so if they lose this game, they won't have the tiebreaker over the Texans. And, their left tackle, Josh Simmons, was put on injured reserve due to a wrist injury. And that's not good when you're playing against arguably the best defensive front in football this week. And it's also crazy like that. My family each week asks me, hey, Jaron, are the Chiefs done? Are the Chiefs done? And my response has pretty much been the same. Technically, they are not done yet because they have they're fortunate enough to still have to play teams in their division at least one more time, which that could help them at least snag the wild card. They're not going to get the 1 seed. They're not. If they get the 1 seed, that'd be insane, voodoo magic. But the other reason why I say the Chiefs' season will likely be over because this is their next 4 games. The Texans, the Chargers, the Titans, the Broncos. 3 of the 4 teams I just said have great defenses. The one that doesn't being the Titans. But the Titans can still, attempt to play spoiler. And, playing against a team that has nothing to lose, that's a scary game. And so, the Texans, they have Will Anderson. They have Danielle Hunter. Their whole defense just good at getting to the quarterback. The Chargers, they have Khalil Mack. They've got, Odafe Owe from the Ravens. 2 good pass rushers. The Broncos, they have Nick Bonito. He's the big name that I can easily name, but their defense as a whole, good defense. And the Texans, they are starting to click on both sides. And like I mentioned earlier, if they're able to sneak into the playoffs, I think they're a team that people are not going to want to play simply just because their defense is just that good. They're just that good. I'm going to take the Texans to win this one 27-23. I think they're going to get the win. And for the final game of the weekend, the Eagles versus the Chargers. This is an important game for both teams. The Eagles, they lost 2 straight. They lost to the Cowboys. They had that bad second half. And against the Bears, yes, they had a couple of missed opportunities, but for the most part, the Bears were in control of that game the entire time. And their offense is just the problem. There's a couple teams this year I basically said their defense will keep them in the game. The Eagles are certainly one of them. And I think the Eagles have to get their offense going if they're going to make some serious noise, because as of right now, this team just gives the same vibes as the 2023 Eagles team, where they had a crazy good start and they lost to the Bucks in the wild card round of the playoffs, I believe. But the Chargers, they have to keep winning and to keep pace with the Broncos. And I do think they have a very talented roster to compete with the Eagles. But I think the one, we'll just say a wild card in this situation is Justin Herbert is likely going to try to play through a broken hand, which he suffered, I believe, last week. Which I'm sure the Eagles are going to try to rely on the ground game, considering the Bears had a lot of success on the ground. But I think the Eagles are going to try to make Justin Herbert make some throws. I believe it's his non-throwing hand that's broken, so which would allow him to be able to play through it. But the Eagles are going to definitely try to, apply some pressure on Justin Herbert, which rightfully so. I would, do the same thing. Like they're going to make you. This is the kind of game where if Justin Herbert has to throw the ball to beat you, and he has a broken left hand, hey, that's the kind of game where if I was the Eagles defensive coordinator or Eagles player, if we were to lose because we lost to a player with a broken hand, don't get me wrong, that's gonna suck. But I'd live through that because you're gonna his left hand, even if it was his right hand, you're gonna be in some pain throwing that football. You're gonna be in some pain even handing off the football. Give me the Chargers to win this game 30-27. That is all I have for this episode of the I Am Passionate podcast. It's your host, Jaron Smith, and I'll see you all next time.